Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainty so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Hey friends, thanks so much for stopping by once again to my podcast here, Raising Daughters. Dr. Tim Jordan here. And as you know, I stop by every week and have a topic that usually has to do with girls in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes I have on guests, and I decided to do a guest today because this topic is something that I really don't know much about, even though I've had 3 kids go through college. And we're going to talk today about the financial aspects of college. How do you figure that stuff out? And if you are the parent of a child now who is 3 or 5, you're thinking, well, this podcast doesn't apply to me. I think that's not true. My guest is going to talk about like kind of the short-term, early-stage college planning, but mostly the late-stage college planning. But all this is going to be information that you should be aware of no matter how old your kids are. So I want to welcome to our show, John. Is it Boruk or Boruk?
Boruk.
Boruk. I was way off.
John Boruk. That's okay. That's okay.
And he's basically a college advisor. He's going to tell us in a minute about his path to get to where he is. But his educational background was actually in journalism. He went to Texas Tech University. He also studied Russian and international economics in Russia, which is interesting. And he had a 25-year career in sports broadcast journalism, during which he received 11 Emmy Awards, 3 Edward R. Murrow Awards. And then he sort of shifted gears, I think, around that time. And he started working with families and students who were looking at college and helping them with the financial aspects. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you having me on. So much appreciated.
And second of all, tell us your path, how you zigzag to what you're doing now.
Sure. So as you alluded to, I went to Texas Tech University. I majored in journalism and history. And my first job out of college was in Missouri. I know that you're based in St. Louis. Exactly. So my first job was in Joplin. And then 2 years after that, I went to Springfield, Missouri. So I spent 4 or 5 years in Missouri before I continued on to Nashville, Detroit, Michigan, and then my stop here just outside in Philadelphia. But sportscasting, I was very passionate about sports. I played baseball in college. And I was very passionate about sportscasting. I came up through the ESPN era of Sports Center, and I wanted to narrate highlights. But I think when I got involved, what really pushed my buttons and what really motivated me was the storytelling aspect and getting out and telling people's stories and formulating a story and putting that in visual form for people to really rally behind and to feel the emotional warmth that comes from when you take somebody's story and you tell it on air. So yeah, I did that for 25 years. I have 3 kids of my own. My oldest is a daughter. And when she became a freshman, I really did a deep dive into the whole college process because as you, I think, talked about real quickly, a lot has changed so much from the time that I was in college and when we were going through the process that everything that you thought that you knew before has completely changed now, especially on the financial side. And I've been in charge of sort of the family's finances and making sure that we were in a good place to make sure that our kids have a college education. But what I just found out more than anything was just how the system operates. What you need to know. And if you don't know this stuff almost prior to high school, you're in for a real shock because they don't tell you this thing. And that's the unfortunate thing is that from the high school counselor side, they simply just don't know this information. They're so overwhelmed. And what I say about our high school counselors, and they do fantastic jobs, don't get me wrong, but they're overworked and they're underpaid. And they simply just don't have the time nor the resources to go through and walk each kid and family through the college preparation steps. So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to the financial side, they're like, well, when I do have families come up to me and say, why didn't anybody tell me about all this? Well, you're not going to get it from the high school, as I just talked about. And the colleges don't want to know this information because they don't want to discount the cost of school any more than they want to. I mean, this is the financial side, the admissions coupled with the financial side. They have a very strict department that knows they've got it almost regulated down to a science, where they know within a 5-minute interview, let's say with a family, within a couple of $1,000s, how much each family is going to pay to go to that particular college. And it's unlike any system that I think that we have in place. And what I tell families is, imagine you have 5 families that go into a grocery store and they all pull out the same groceries, the same brands, the same groceries. But when they go to pay for it, all 5 families pay a different price. And you can sit there and say, that doesn't seem fair, but that's how the system works. And that's the system that we have in place here in the United States, in the higher education system. And it starts at the government level when you fill out the FAFSA form, and it works right down to the admission side.
And one of the places families can start is with what you call their base year. Mm-hmm. So tell my listeners what you mean by the student's base year.
So when you fill out the FAFSA form, and that is in the fall of your child's senior year, they want to know financial information pertaining to your base year. So your base year, and this is where, when I talk about, this is information that you need to know, because your base year is 2 years prior, or at least a student's base year is 2 years prior to the year they graduate. So let's say you have incoming seniors coming up. Their graduation year is 2025 for next year. Their base year is 2023. So the government and the colleges and universities are collecting the financial information from 2023. So the year's already passed, but until you file your FAFSA form, you have no idea that they're going to be asking for that information in a method that's very similar to your tax returns, right? You know, when you file your taxes, it's not necessarily how you file your taxes that makes a difference. It's the work that you do in the year prior, right? And because if you don't sit there and keep receipts, or you don't track miles, and if you're a 1099, all of that, the work and the process that you do in collecting the information for your taxes, same thing goes for the FAFSA in your base year. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you position yourself to lower your student aid index, because that's the most important number that you're going to need to know as a family when your kid goes to college, is what is my student aid index number? And that goes back to that base year, because that's the number that's going to determine how high it is or how low it is, and we want that number to be as low as possible.
And how do colleges assess that? The student aid index. That's an important number.
The student aid index is the most important number when it comes to paying for college. And what they do is, there's 2 categories of that. There are assessable assets and there are non-assessable assets. Assessable assets would be stocks, mutual funds, CDs, any sort of bank accounts, anything that's not really a 401k or an IRA. And in terms of your retirement accounts, those would fall under non-assessable accounts. So 401ks, IRAs, cash value life insurance, annuities, those items would be considered non-assessable. Any cash, if you have cash under a mattress, it's just been sitting there, that would be inaccessible. So anything, any hard cash. So really the way to think about it is anything that's not earmarked for retirement typically is an assessable asset that you need to report on your FAFSA form into the government. Now, if you own a business, it gets a little bit more complicated. I won't go into all of that, because I know I'm not talking to probably a lot of business owners out there, but the rules constantly change, and the FAFSA form and the rules behind the FAFSA form have changed significantly. Fewer questions, a little bit more confusing. But what you want to know is, if when it pertains to that student aid index, we want to keep that number down. So if there's a way to shift some of the possessions that you have, whether you have some accounts from assessable assets to non-assessable, you want to do that in an effort to really save money. And by making those strategic moves, those strategic financial moves, it can really help you save thousands of dollars on the price that you're going to pay for your child to go to college. It's very important. And I'll give you an example. Per se, while I talk about 401k and IRAs, while the money that's sitting in those accounts don't count against you, the contributions that you make to a 401k or an IRA within your base year or the year after do count against you. So it's little things like that you need to know to make sure that you are keeping your student aid index number down. And it's making those strategic financial decisions and putting them into place a couple years before you get to the point to where now my child is making the college visits, we're applying for colleges, and then we're getting those award letters back.
At the risk of sounding cynical, I wonder if the system makes it this complicated for a reason, because it's so hard for parents, I think, to figure all that out on their own. And it's hard for, like you were saying, it's hard for high school counselors to figure it out, and that's their job, much less a parent who hasn't been through the process themselves, who weren't a college grad and all that. I think it puts a lot of people I think it puts everybody at a disadvantage, but I think especially people who have less experience.
Well, I mean, let's face it. I don't know of anything that the federal government does that simplifies anything, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you apply for federal, I mean, just look at when they write up a bill, it's 1,600 pages. But it's not just college funding. It's your taxes. You look at the tax laws that are on the books. I mean, none of this is ever simple, but I think they're always looking away, and they're always trying to catch up to make sure that I truly believe that while their heart may be in the right place, at times some of the laws and some of the things regulating and the money and the financial side of college doesn't always work out in favor of middle class families. So what's important is that, look, a lot of these colleges and universities have multi-million and in many cases billion-dollar endowments. We should, as families, I think it is our responsibility, and why I take a real great passion in this, to try to tap in to those endowments, because the colleges and universities, they have the type of money that they can help through their scholarships, their grants, tuition waivers, whatever you want to call it, that they can help students. And that's the way that they look at it. And this is what I tell families, is that you have to look at this process as a business. The number one mistake I think families make is they don't take emotion out of the equation. And when you don't take emotion out of the equation, you make decisions based on emotions instead of being level-headed. If you buy a car, you're not going to just rush onto the lot and say, that's the car that I want. You're going to go to 4 or 5 different car lots, make a well-informed decision, find the car that really fits your needs as well as your want, and then do the negotiation back and forth with the car salesman. It's really not that much different when it comes to college. We encourage families to look at 6 to 8 colleges, to know if you apply to 6 to 8 colleges that you're going to be comfortable going to one of those 6 to 8 schools. And then we can do an apples to apples comparison and make sure that you're getting the best deal possible.
We're talking to John Boruk. He owns a company that's called the Smart College Advisor, and he helps families and he helps young people to find the best college fit and also help them to be able to afford it. Would it be fair to say that, I'm saying this because I think a lot of families feel like they have no leverage, like the college has all the power, all the leverage, and they're just kind of, I don't know, just they have to take what they get, kind of, sort of. But would it be fair to say that colleges need to fill the seats, and so they're more open to, I don't know if negotiating is the right term, but they're more open to
they can negotiate.
Parents
that's a good word. They do have leverage. And that's the thing, is that schools look at students as investment, right? I mean, that's the best way I can say it, is that you're just like I think that our federal government looks at us as nothing more than taxpayers with a social security number. Colleges and universities look at your child as an investment. And as an investment, who's going to give us the best return on that investment are typically the kids that get into the schools that they apply to. So that's the thing that families don't realize, is that they do have leverage. And what we're seeing now since 2010 is there's been a 10% decline in college enrollment. So you're looking at schools that having trouble filling the seats, not necessarily the tier 1, the elite schools. In fact, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cornell, Dartmouth, Columbia, those types of schools, Cal, Berkeley, they're actually seeing an increase. So what you're seeing are those tier 2 and tier 3 colleges and universities that are kind of getting, they're maybe not getting the cream of the crop, but they're getting the next best group out of that. And they're the ones that are having trouble filling the seats, which is one of the criteria and one of the aspects that we look at when it comes to some of the analytics is called the yield. And I know families get caught up. They get caught up in the admissions rate in terms of how many kids apply to actually how many kids get in. What we take a look at is the yield. And the yield is how many kids that are admitted to the school as opposed to how many actually get in. Now, you can imagine like a Harvard, a Yale's got a really high yield. And it makes sense, right? Harvard gives you a letter and says, we want your kid to come there. You're going to go there if you can afford it. And most kids find a way. Here's a good example. Since you're there in the St. Louis area, Washington University, they had about 10 years ago, they're having their yield was really small in the 20 percentile. So when you have a school that has a low yield, what does that tell you? It tells you they're having trouble filling the seats, right? And when you're competing with the Harvards and the Yales and the Columbias and stuff, what do you have to do when your yield is in the 20 percentile? You got to discount the cost of admission. You got to bring the price down to make it more attractive to those types of students. And Washington University, very good school, tier 1 school, high academic standards. So when we have schools that we see that have that type of yield, we tell families, give these schools a look because they value your student. And we think that, and they do have good endowments, that we think that we can get more money than what we would get with some of these other schools because they do need your student more than you probably need them.
We told our kids when they were growing up that mom and dad had saved for their college, and we would be willing to pay for a state school. We said, we don't want you to go to state school. We want you to go wherever you want to go, but we'll have saved enough where you can get your room board tuition to a state school. If you want to go somewhere else, go for it, but you'll have to figure out the rest. So our daughter went to a state school. She wanted to be a teacher, and there's a good teacher school in Missouri. And then our first son, he drew a circle on the map around the Midwest. He said, I want to go somewhere outside of that circle. So he ended up actually in Texas. He went to TCU in Fort Worth, Texas.
Fort Worth, Texas. Yeah. I grew up about 10 minutes from there.
Nice. And so, but anyway, he got some scholarship. He got our contribution, and then he worked all 4 years. But then at the end of I think it was his first or second year, they of course raised the tuition, and so he didn't have that, right? So he had the I was going to say gall, but the courage, or he had the whatever you want to call it, to go up to the financial aid office on his own and say, look, I've got a 4.0. I like this place. I want to go for 4 years. I need more money. And they gave him more money twice. Yeah. And I think, and you mentioned that on your website stuff, that a lot of times families and our young people have the ability to sometimes get more than they started with.
And what I tell families is, look, don't scratch off a school off your list because of what we call the sticker price. So a lot of private schools that come in around 80,000 here in the Philadelphia area, you got Villanova, LaSalle, Drexel in the $75,000 to $80,000 range. Don't ever scratch a school off because of the advertised price. Okay, let's go through the process. Let's see what the school will offer. Let's compare apples to apples. Remember, how much you pay is based on 2 criteria. 1, your child's academic record, and 2, your family's financial portfolio, and how in that SAI number that we were talking about earlier. So those 2 things. But let's go through the process, because oftentimes, believe it or not, and this is really hard, I think, for families to wrap their hands around, is that the price of a private school will be cheaper than one of your state college, because on a number of reasons. 1, well, they don't have as high of an enrollment as some of these public schools that we're talking about. Penn State here, you're looking at 50,000 students, and they have a much larger endowment that they can play with. So they have a lot more money that they can play with. And when they see a student, maybe like your son who had a 4.0, they're much more willing to give that student more money to get him to be part of their system, knowing and believing that once he graduates, he's going to contribute back to the community, which is very key, contribute to the community and contribute back to their school and give back to their endowment. So I think my earbuds just went out. Let's see if can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So piggybacking off what I was saying was they have more money to play with. I'll give you a good example. I had a family that says that they applied to private and public schools, and they were accepted by all of them. This child wanted to go to the University of Chicago, which is, I think it's the most expensive school in the country right now. But the family said, we can't afford, only if we can get in by the in-state price of what we would pay at Penn State, which was, I think, maybe 38 or 40,000. They said, sure, okay. That's it. All right, we'll do it. And so now they're going to the University of Chicago at the same price that they would have paid for an in-state to go to an in-state college here in Pennsylvania, which is, look, what's the worst that they can say? No, or they'll come close. But go through the process. We help them with that. We'll help them, guide them through the process. That's one of the things that we do. We tell you how to appeal an award letter, which is merely a request for more money. And in the case of your son, we also have an aptitude and personality test, because we want our kids to graduate within 4 or 4.5 years. Our average is 4.5 years, as opposed to the national average, which is now 5.5 years. So one of the reasons to do that is we want to make sure we're finding the college that is the ideal fit. And the perfect case with your son, he wanted to go outside the Midwest. That was important to him. So we like to take all those things into consideration. Big school, small school. You want to be close to home. You want to be far from home. Do you want to be in a mountain type setting? Do you want to be in a city setting? So it's finding those schools that would be a good fit. Because you really, if you want to do this process the right way, I talk about the financial side, but we really tackle 3 core components: academic, social, and financial. Financial is the big one, but all 3 of them are very important.
We are talking with John Boruk, who's a college financial advisor. He owns a company called Smart College Advisor. I'll give you the website, or he will, as we end this podcast. I want to ask a question, one more question, I think. And that is that some of those colleges I see are now costing 40, 60, 80, whatever. And I see some young people who are going to study psychology or study sociology or something to be a social worker, which is great. But then they're at risk of coming out of college with a huge amount of debt it's going to take them their whole life to pay off. Well, how do you advise young people about that? I know you're trying to help them get deals and all that, and there is some reality of sometimes it's expensive.
And this is why I like to get kids that are coming in as freshmen in high school, because here's part of the problem, and I know that we were talking about it earlier, is this is why colleges kind of want to get you on a path, and why your high school guidance counselor wants to put you on a path to what do you want to do. Because, and I was referring back to that aptitude test that we do, is we want to find out what their abilities are, what their interests, what's their values, and then sort of separate. Because look, I mean, I love to play golf, but I don't have any real natural ability in it, right? So playing golf is more of a hobby. So it's really key to separate what's a good hobby, what's an interest, something that they like to do, as opposed to something that they're passionate about that makes for a good career choice, right? I was recently working with somebody who loved art, and they like to draw, and they were really good with taking and using that art. I said, okay. So we went through, we started this process as they were a freshman, all the way through, and as they became a junior and a senior, we started to realize that they didn't really want to be an art teacher, which didn't really make sense for what they wanted to do. But they were able to take that passion for art and then use it to be an architecture major in college. And so what we help do is not only realize what they like to do, but eliminate a lot of the things that don't really make sense, or things that they don't like to do. And as you know, high school kids have a tendency to change their mind like the wind. One year they like this, and another year they like something else. They don't really know, and it's really hard as parents, because your brain is you're not fully functioning until your mid-20s. So we need to help them and help guide them through the process to figure out what makes sense for them, and then to put them in sort of a career path that really are they going to make money from this, right? Is this going to be a career that if they have to take out a bunch of loans, that they're going to be able to pay off those loans, instead of saying 5 years out of college and they're having trouble getting a job? Because that's not what no one wants. That's not why you pay, or you see a college with an $80,000 sticker price, because you've gone 4 years into college and you don't have a plan. You don't have a career path that you can follow. So that's one of the real key things, is we want to see is, yes, it's a passion, but is it a passion that's more in line with a hobby and something you do on the side? Or is this a passion that you can create and carve and formulate into a career, that's something that you can do for the next 20, 25 years? I tell my kids, and I tell the kids that we work with, look, I'm not going to say that money is not important. It is important, but the worst thing that you can do in life is to do something that you dread doing just for a paycheck. Look, I mean, sportscasting is what I wanted to do. I didn't know what my second act of life was going to be until I found this, and this has become my new passion in life. But sometimes you don't know it. And look at me, I'm an adult. You would think that I would know, but that's why you have to go through the process. And it helps to have somebody kind of behind you to kind of give you a nudge and to say, maybe this is a good idea, or maybe this isn't a good idea.
Have you ever read the book Dark Horse?
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things he found was he studied a lot of very successful people who were dark horses, who, people didn't expect much, and then they end up exceeding expectations, became successful in all kinds of different fields. But anyway, one of the things that he noticed in his research was that people who were successful and happy and fulfilled, when they were 50, 60, they didn't like have a goal and put their nose to the grindstone and grind it out for 40 years. And then at the end, then they were happy and fulfilled. He said those people all found something that right from the start that fulfilled them. And that changed over time, oftentimes, like yours changed over time. Not necessarily because things change, because you change. We grow and our interests grow, and just different, we grow. And so our passions may grow into something different. So I think it is hard, I think, for parents. It's a complicated thing to try, and it's complicated to be 18 with all these choices in front of you to know what to pick. But I hope this is true. I advise young people who I counsel, young women who I counsel, to say, relax. Whatever you're going to start with now, it's probably not going to be what you end with. It's okay. I always tell them to interview every adult they bump into and say, how did you get here? When you were my age, did you know you'd be doing this? And I tell them 90% of the people you're going to ask are going to say, I didn't have a clue. And it's okay. So start with what you're passionate about that fulfills you now, and then if it grows into something else, that's okay. You'll acquire the education and the experience you need in order to be able to do those new things.
Yeah, and real simple. I mean, I just say, look, don't follow the money. Follow the passion, and the money will follow. And that's really how I navigated my 25-year broadcasting career. I'll be honest, when 1993, when I started, thankfully, I started in the Midwest where prices were small, but I made $13,000. But I wasn't following the money. I followed the passion, and I knew that I'm going up the steps in order to achieve a certain level of excellence that I was striving for. I had a goal in mind and a purpose, and I was following that purpose, and money just was something that helped me along the way until I got to where I needed to be. So yeah, it's like I said, I want students to focus on the things that drive them. And another thing is, when you're in high school, it's easy to want to coast. You feel like that, well, I took hard courses, but what colleges want to see is they want to see that you continuously challenge yourself. So even when you become a senior, I guard against, don't take the intro to cooking class or principles of pickleball or something like that. Maintain your structure, continue to challenge yourself in your core curriculum, because that's what ultimately colleges think, that if you're going to challenge yourself at the high school level, then we know that they're going to challenge themselves when they come to our college or university.
So if parents want to get a hold of you because they're looking for some guidance as far as the whole college financial process, yeah. Ideally, when should they start? And then what's the process by which you serve them?
So I break it down into two parts. So there's early stage college planning. And that's when you start saving money for earmarking it for college. And that usually happens when your child is born. It can happen before that. It can happen when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the case. You start setting aside money for college. Okay. We really focus on the late stage college planning. And I'm not going to go too much into 529s. If you started at 529, I get it. It's not what I would consider a recommended product, believe it or not, because it goes back to that being an accessible asset that's counted against you. You're like, wait a second, why is this counted against you? Because the government and colleges know that 529 money is going towards college. That's why they count it against you. That's why I'm not a big fan of the 529. But that's where we help families along the way when it comes to preparing themselves, knowing here's what I need to have. How can I position myself so that I'm in a better situation to get more money from the colleges? So that's what we help working with. You can go to my website, smartcollegeadvisor.com. I work with a company called College Funding Solutions. They've been in this space for 30 years. We've assisted, I think, nearly 30,000 families during that time. We pay for data on schools you're not going to find on the internet. So we know essentially right down to a few $1,000s what 95% of the colleges are, what you actually have to pay, not the sticker price, not the advertised price. So you can do that. You go to smartcollegeadvisor.com. You can email me at john@collegefundingsolutions.org. So either way, I like to make myself accessible. I love to answer families' questions. Any questions they have. Not only do I consider myself an advisor, but I consider myself an advocate for families that are going through this because I've gone through it. So I know what you're faced with. And what I hate to see is I know that there's every family has a pain point that keeps them up at night. And that's what I like to give them the ease to know that you don't have to lose sleep over this. You just need somebody to talk to.
So it's smartcollegeadvisor.com. And then there was John at
collegefundingsolutions.org. You can email me there. All that information is on the website, my email. There's a contact page if you wanted to reach out. So, yeah.
And for those of you who are jogging right now or you're walking around the neighborhood, I will always have all these links and the websites and stuff on my show notes. So just go to drtimjordan.com and get those. You don't have to memorize it right now. Thank you so much for coming on the show and giving our parents a good look at what I think can be a complicated and overwhelming process for them. I think having somebody who can guide, advise, I think could be really helpful.
Yeah. And I appreciate it, Tim, so much. Thanks for having me come on. And like I said, the podcast and what you're doing for girls out there and for daughters. Like I said, I have one of my own who's a special needs daughter with a condition called Williams syndrome. So there's some challenges that are involved with that, but I think we all want the best, right? We all want we all want our kids to excel anything that we've ever done in life. And that's, I think, what I want for my children. And I that's why I like to help families out there and why it's given me such a great purpose in life.
Thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate all the information you gave our audience. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.